afternoon. You're listening to Count Richard von Coudenhove Clergy. Today is a lovely day. It's Wednesday, the 14th of May, and I have Mr. Ed Shanahan beside me here, who is actually running in the local elections for Kimage, Crumlin, Harold's Cross, Rathmines and Rathgar. And I just want to say, Ed, thank you very much for agreeing to go for a cruise with the Count today.
My privilege.
And, appreciate you, taking the time out of your busy schedule, especially coming up to election and things like that. So I'd be most grateful if you could give us a little bit of a background as to who Ed Shanahan is.
Well, if I may,
yes.
I can tell you I'm a barrister.
Right.
I'm also an academic. I know a lot about contract law and commercial law and other areas of law. I look after all kinds of questions for a big range of people, I should say.
Right.
Now I'm also, I have been in a number of colleges, universities, and I teach on the commercial side as well. But I have to tell you that my interests range into a lot of areas. It could be anything to do with human rights, lots of things, comparative law and so on. I also have a background as an economist and as a guy who knows about finance.
Right.
I also taught these things. I had been a libertarian. I have a little bit, yeah, I've been around a few years.
Right.
Now, I'm also, maybe the more critical thing is that I've always been aware of what's happening on the planet.
So the way of the world?
Yeah, and I've been, since the advent of the internet for us all, it certainly increased my understanding of how things are. So effectively, I would say to you, briefly stated, I would say that I am red-pilled.
Red-pilled, okay.
I understand how things are, the grid of power, the pyramid of power, if you
Yes.
like, how things are internationally, how they are in Ireland.
Right.
So I would have to tell you, and here I'm afraid the news is not good,
Right.
that we are in existential crisis.
Right.
And that is for a number of reasons. There isn't just one particular question. I think we have a problem with our identity these days, where we're not as we were, and there is a kind of malaise, if you wish.
Right.
And we have to. I could spend an hour.
Interrupt you, Ed.
Yes.
In relation to layman's terms, what does malaise mean? That
It means
sleepwalking, a kind of a fog?
Doesn't mean that exactly. It
Right.
means that there is a problem there is an apathy, but
Right.
there's also
Gotcha.
a problem in their thinking, how they view the world, how they view themselves.
Right.
There's a kind of it is a kind of an apathy and a weakness and unpreparedness to act in the way they need to
Right.
to solve their own problems.
Right.
Because we do have problems, I have to say to you.
Could it be an inferiority complex?
Well,
Down
it's
through
part
kind
of
a
history,
generational-
but I think that it also relates to what's happening in Europe
Right.
across the planet now. We can talk about things like social engineering,
Right.
a huge issue that is to be, you can consider. But today, since I do understand that everybody in politics has to address
Right.
practical issues, I could talk about 20 things to you this afternoon,
Right.
but I promise you I won't talk about 20 things.
Right.
I'll talk about 2 or 3 or maybe
Okay.
4.
Yeah. Well, even in relation to what you'd like to get elected on, Ed, what would
Okay.
you like to see change?
Okay, we
And
have
what your experience would be to affect that change?
immediate problems.
Yes.
If I can be so frank, and I'm sorry if I have to speak about these things, but they're hugely significant. Problems with regard to immigration,
Right.
and policy in relation to that, housing policy, also in terms of the cost of living. And the last thing is the problems we have with social services, healthcare and so on.
And a green agenda?
The green agenda is hugely significant. If I start off with the green agenda,
Please. It's a good place
I
to start.
am hugely respectful of our environment. I think that anyone who cares about this world will.
Sure.
However, I have no respect for people who employ the use of junk science.
Right.
It's very evident that things are being said which are you cannot stand over intellectually.
Yes.
So anybody, if I can be so plain, anybody who promotes that kind of junk science to a public that isn't so well informed,
Yes.
unfortunately, as perhaps they should be,
Yeah.
is, frankly speaking, a grifter,
Right.
as I would see it. So I'm totally,
a tin rattler.
I'm afraid so. So I'm utterly opposed to
Yeah.
people who preach, try to frighten people,
Yeah.
essentially, and are not respectful of fact and the means and the uses of science and,
Right.
and the type of methodologies we employ in science. So
But that's
those
exactly the
people
problem
are
is the
yeah.
modelling. Where does the modelling come from? Who does the modelling? Who pays for the modelling? And whose interest is it to promote misinformation? I mean, if I may, recently there was a clip of Aidan O'Riordan, who I think unfortunately is running. Is he in the same constituency as
Could
you?
well be. It
Yes.
could well be, yes.
Where he mentioned on a programme
I
that
think
he
he is, yes.
expected Ireland, that half of Ireland would be covered in water in the next 30 years. Now, unless Noah is going to come back, there isn't a hope in hell's chance that it's actually going to happen. You
Well,
know?
I have to say,
Yes.
I absolutely agree with you.
Yeah.
These people are usually poorly informed and they don't have a background in the sciences. However, in certain instances, and it is a real problem,
Yeah.
research, because I am an academic,
Right.
that people will gravitate towards areas where there are grants, and
There you go.
frankly speaking, there is an agenda. Powerful people on this planet want to pursue particular objectives. Perhaps they are not in our interests
Yeah.
at all, and ordinary people will have to suffer hugely
Yes.
because of these terrible elements of an agenda which are anti-human, as I would see it. But you know, broadly speaking, this whole idea of social engineering, I'm very, very conscious of. I did mention to you immigration,
Yes.
housing policy, and so on. But it's more than that. We're talking about a clampdown on freedom of thought.
Right.
You find that in the academy, you find it across the board. There are particular ideas that cannot be discussed
Right.
in all the environments, even for the small children in the junior schools.
Yes.
Junior schools, they cannot things they cannot say, they cannot think. They're told from the earliest days that this is not acceptable.
Yeah.
And when you come along to the colleges, there are lots of areas of research that are effectively prohibited. You cannot express particular views or certain arguments. That kind of thing isn't on anymore.
Yeah.
That type of trend, it wasn't always there, but it's been there for quite a few years. You can't
the whole cancel
you
culture
haven't
as
a
well.
paper published. You can't have a paper published.
Yes.
You can't get a job, a position, or
Yeah.
if you do have that, you'll be chased out of it. It's happening hugely in North America. It's happening in this country, I would say,
Yeah.
in Britain and continental Europe and so on.
Yeah.
That's a very concerning trend
Yeah.
in our world, and this is a trend generally towards a collectivist,
Right.
harmful arrangement that is. It is a form of communism, but it's of a different kind that we experienced before.
Yeah.
And really, anybody who speaks out and is concerned about the individual is regarded as being
Far
a
right.
harmful individual.
Yeah.
Also, now, the things I need to speak to
Yeah.
people about this afternoon, and it isn't to say that these things are pleasant to talk about, but
Right.
I feel that
We
there
need
is
to be
a
adult.
moral.
Yes.
We need to be adult.
In our speech.
I think there is a moral imperative
Yeah.
to do so. Starting off, I mean, as I say, I think we are in existential crisis. I am very well aware of how things are in this country,
Yeah.
and how things are across Europe, and
Right.
trends, and say the demography and so on.
But just if I may,
Yes.
with your background, have you noticed, for instance, an overrepresentation of foreign nationals in regards in crime? Would you see that in
Unfortunately,
the courts?
that is absolutely the case.
Right.
But people, I mean,
which would go
the-
exactly against what Helen McEntee is saying, that there's no correlation between an increase in migration and crime.
I don't question that. I'm saying that
Yes.
people are not interchangeable.
Okay.
Every group have their own ways of doing things, and that's fine.
Right.
I am totally an ethno-pluralist.
Right.
I believe everybody should have the chance of achieving what they can in life in
Right.
their own part of the world.
Yes.
I'm not saying that it can be the case that they can come to any country in the world and say, look, I'm Swedish.
Right.
I'm as Swedish as anybody else, or Danish,
But there's a
or
difference,
Irish,
but
or
there's a
German.
difference. See, this is where people, in my opinion, differ between somebody who's an Irish citizen and somebody who's Irish by birth. It's two different things. I mean, it's like having an Irish couple in China to have a child. But do you think that child is Chinese?
I wouldn't.
Well,
No.
there you go. So
I wouldn't.
It's
I
idiotic
think,
to think otherwise.
yeah, there's a lot of social engineering that we could spend a long time speaking about,
Right.
and perhaps it could create a few problems for us legally, and
Right.
possibly the wise
Well,
thing
you're the
is
legal
not to
guy
say.
here, so, I mean,
So I have to
that's
be
your
quite
department.
careful in
No, I
in
understand.
what I say. But if I speak about immigration for
Yeah.
a moment, I'm of the view that everything is out of control.
Right.
We don't
And
seem to
sorry
have a handle
interrupt
on
you, Ed,
things.
if I may, even if we talk about the European, the migration pact at the moment now,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
how the party seem to be flip-flopping, especially the likes of Sinn Féin are flip-flopping from, well, we don't agree with it, but there's two parts of it we do. This kind of nonsense.
Well,
You know?
to begin with,
Yes.
I haven't a huge amount of respect for that party.
Right.
That's just my own personal view. But I think that what we don't have in this country is any kind of leadership.
Right.
People who will say no and say this is absolutely out of the question
Yeah.
for Irish people in this country. Obviously, there is room for some migration.
Yes.
That was always the case.
Out of control.
Out of control
Yes.
immigration is totally it's absolutely
Yeah.
evil, as
Yeah.
I would see it. So, in terms of my own thinking, is that I would be of the view that Irish people have not been consulted
Right.
with regard to immigration and
So
all
would
kinds
you-
of policy. In terms of the EU program, in terms of the migration pact and
Right.
so on, that will ensure that we have less control
Right.
than before. We'll simply have to take people in, or we'll have to pay a penalty, which is very, very significant. We can't afford to do that.
Yeah.
But in terms of specifics,
Yes.
or even before I talk about that, I have to say that Irish people have not been consulted as regards our policy in terms of what's happening in practice. And it seems to be,
Right.
to a large extent, the people in power arguably are not our friends.
Would you say
They're not
then
our friends.
that the people that we actually elect have broken the sacred contract?
I would be inclined to that view.
So
And
would
I
I.
mean, obviously, you understand that I'm not going to say too much
Right.
on a question like that, but
Yes.
I would be inclined to that view.
Because that was
However,
Edmund Burke's
yes, yes,
thing on the sacred contract
for sure.
between the
But
dead, the living, and the yet born.
the point is, as
Yes.
I see it, is that Irish people have not been consulted, so
Right.
there's room for a debate, a huge debate that is information rich.
Right.
That's absolutely critical, and I think we, in terms of reports and research reports, and it must be free and fair.
Sure.
Because I do have concerns about the mainstream media.
Yes.
I don't think that views
lack of
are
impartiality.
always allowed for. They don't allow people, no matter how articulate they are
Yeah.
or informed they are, to present a certain viewpoint.
Yeah.
I do think increasingly people are concerned. So the first requirement, as I would see it, would be a requirement that we have a full debate that is very, very careful and thorough.
And
That
in
is
its wording.
in wording indeed,
Yeah.
but also in terms of having access to information
Right.
and critical thinking. Lots and lots of critical thinking
Would it be
in the
form
open
of-
space.
Would it
In
be
the
a form
open
of
space.
citizens' assembly, something on those lines?
I
or
think
would
there
you
could be
have-
something of that kind.
Right.
I would be absolutely in favor of that.
Yes.
And then, having had that huge debate,
Yes.
it should be informed, it should be substantive.
Right.
We could have a number of referenda
Correct.
relating to that with specific questions,
Right.
so that we have to regain control of our immigration policy.
Right.
And I should say as well that people will say, oh look, what about the European Union and all these conventions and so on. I have a viewpoint which is quite radical on questions like that. I'm of the view
Yeah.
that we should be prepared to think the unthinkable.
Which is to get out of
And
the EU.
if we have to consider it, now people will be pragmatists and say,
Right.
look, that's too much. However, I'll say to you,
Yeah.
in terms of a response to that, I would say that our present arrangements are too much.
Yes.
And we cannot sustain the immigration into this country when people who often, can I speak plainly,
Yeah.
who don't have a lot of they don't have a lot in common. We don't have a lot in common with
Right.
them. They don't speak our language. Perhaps they like us, perhaps they don't like us.
Yeah.
And
You
who's to
can't
say
force people to get on.
You can't, and
matter
also
how much money
it
you
cannot
throw
be a
them.
question. I
Yes.
mean, this concept of not immigration, but integration is a silly one.
Right.
It isn't something that can be achieved very easily,
Right.
and that people like in the NGOs who are promoting that are behaving, as I would see it, irresponsibly. But having expressed those views,
Yes.
we're looking for exemplars in countries in Europe which have addressed the type of questions that we have to address at this time. As in Scandinavia, say
Right.
Denmark, for instance, is an absolutely brilliant example for our purposes. I think it should be thought of as an exemplar. Now, they have been quite tough on illegal immigration, and something that we need to be prepared to do as well. And then they're also, in terms of refugees, they're very restrictive with regard to that. In fact, they have a zero refugee policy at this time, so far as I am concerned. Now, in terms of the residence permits and so on, I think they need to be. We should be prepared to revoke these things in particular instances and have them as a short-term arrangement. If people are traveling over to the country of origin, if they're criminals, if they behave, and incidentally, who's to say that we're aware of the identity of these people? I'm not aware of them. There's a lot of crime going on in this country.
That comes into a country illegally.
It's just not possible. And the other observation as well in terms of the Scandinavian experience is that even if you bring people, these people in certain instances could be highly qualified, and that's a positive thing in a country in terms of promoting the economy and so on. It is a problem in terms of, if you talk about cohesiveness, and that's perhaps a loaded term.
Right.
It could be a loaded term. So, there can be a trickle of people coming in who are highly qualified, no issues with stuff like that. But if you've got, just in terms of practicalities, you don't have to go beyond practicalities. If you've got lots of people coming in here who perhaps poorly educated, who are traumatized because of war, perhaps they're not traumatized, perhaps they're just moving from country to country, and it suits them to come here. Precisely.
We're an island.
So I think that our problem is that we're regarded, if I can be so bold, as a soft touch. And we have to change that. Effectively, I'm saying that we have to halt our present arrangements and possibly, well, I say possibly, I think we should go into reverse, if I'm being absolutely plain about it. But even in terms of the Scandinavian experience, there's a lot of things I have to say about that. For instance, if you're bringing people into an economy of the kind that we have, they've got to be able to make, just from the point of view of an economist, I'm not talking about any other aspect, and a person concerned about social questions and social welfare and so on, these people have to be capable of making a significant contribution to that economy. If they're poorly educated, and that won't be happening. So you need an economy that's quite competitive in the world, and also in that type of environment, it means that if you have a welfare system, and it's great to have that kind of system, it means that the state must be able to collect a lot in the way of taxation and so on. And the reality is that these people who cannot add a lot of value, economically speaking, I'm just talking those terms, won't be able to contribute. They will be a problem for this country. Just in terms of welfare policy and economic interests and so on, we can't sustain this kind of arrangement. We can't afford to have plenty of people of that kind.
But it must be a bureaucratic dream, because you have to have all the associated paraphernalia that goes along with all of this. Everything from translators to, if you look even from a classroom point of view, that now you have a situation where that you could have, like there's a young lady that spoke outside the custom house, and she spoke about her child being the only Irish class in the classroom. Imagine that.
Yes, indeed. I think that huge integration problems, you can't have integration anyway, and conflicts increasingly, but the reality is that you cannot sustain that kind of model. And there are lots of people in the world right now who would say that the type of economic, not just economic planning, but social engineering, because that's what we're really talking about. And it isn't accidental. This thing has been around for quite some time, since at least the 1920s. And it came into being, yes, precisely. and it came strongly into being in the UK after the last war,
Right.
and other countries as well a little while later.
But I think it was accelerated, though, for instance, under the Blair government.
I would absolutely agree. So, I mean, we're really talking about the playing out of agendas here,
Right.
which are quite sinister.
Yes.
And I won't go in too much to that, but I'm
Okay.
just alluding to it at this time. But effectively, what I'm saying is that you cannot sustain this kind of arrangement,
Sure.
and it isn't going to succeed, and possibly it's not meant to succeed.
Right.
That's the critical thing. So you'll have huge integration problems. People who coming from whatever country it happens to be,
Yeah.
who aren't speaking English, perhaps not interested in speaking English,
Sure.
and perhaps they wouldn't particularly appreciate our culture or traditions.
Yeah.
These people are probably impossible to integrate. It just won't happen. It
Yeah.
won't happen, and what happens, because they won't be involved in the economy, you have increasingly a black economy,
So you're effectively
and you
importing-
have all kinds of things, the emergence of criminal groups,
Yeah.
and that's exactly, and people who are enormously frustrated, you don't like to be in this country, really. They take the gips and
Yeah.
stuff like that, but they won't be happy to be in this country, and they will be very resentful of us. Now, and if these people are increasing in great numbers in terms of the demography and so on, and that is the way they tend to be,
Right.
effectively you're talking about very quickly. I hope I'm not saying anything I'm
No,
not
you're
here
fine
to
so far.
hurt people's feelings. I'm not
Right.
here to hurt anyone's feelings.
Yeah.
Effectively, you have a social crisis, and either there are people, and the challenging thing and the concerning thing is that the powers that be in this country, or the powers that should not be, if I'm
Yeah.
very frank,
Yeah.
don't seem to care too much.
Yeah.
And you do wonder about their interests with regard to Irish people. If I can be so bold, I'll talk about
Yeah.
the nation. And
I
the
think,
idea,
if I may, Ed,
Yes.
that we are a bit like Vichy France, in my opinion. That after France was taken over by the Germans, they had what was known as the Vichy government, which was set up under Marshal Pétain, and it was a government of occupation. And it was my belief that we have what is there now was actually government occupation, because they don't seem to be acting in the interest or wishes of the Irish people. I think it's more to do with the likes of the World Economic Forum and other organisations that they seem to be, connected with.
well, I think we're in a context of globalism,
Right.
of planned arrangements for Europe, this
Yes.
part of Europe, and North America, other countries as well. It's very evident, and there is a contempt for ordinary people which is enormously concerning.
Sure.
And I'm saying to you that we in this country can regain control of our own patch, but only, I don't think of Ireland as merely a platform of rock,
Right.
where anybody can start over and rewrite the script and say what happened for the last 10,000 years on this island is of no significance, and the people in the country are of no significance.
Yes.
But there's a lot of things I need to unpack today.
Yeah.
I'll simply say that we have no control over immigration problems, immigration issue,
Yeah.
and policy, and that has to change. And that can only change in a context where you have, I hesitate to use the word uprising, but certainly a strong movement
Yes.
against present trends in a number of European countries. It could involve social conflict.
Yeah.
I think that's perfectly possible.
Yeah.
And we do have, I speak about the Scandinavians, and remember that the Scandinavians have changed their viewpoint and policy very absolutely
Yeah.
in just a number of years,
Yeah.
20 years and so on. And that's exactly the approach that we have.
But
People in politics in this country,
Yeah.
leadership, need to adopt. But I think that because of our environment, the geopolitical environment, we've got the States on one side, Britain on the other, and we've gotten the key elements in the country, the managerial class, the people
Right.
in banking, and so on, being
So-
very much on board
Right.
the way things are. I think we have a fight on our hands.
Right.
I believe in the rule of law,
Yeah.
in peaceful approaches, insofar as that is that is permissible. I'm saying that we do have. I mean, the reality is, I read a chap, a great constitutional lawyer called Carl Schmitt,
right,
and I know his work very well in a number of languages. So, if I may say so, I hope I'm not conceited in saying that.
Yes.
But his idea is that you do not choose your enemy.
Yes.
It's not one of the ideas of your enemy chooses you. I would suggest to you this afternoon that we do have enemies,
yes,
domestic and foreign,
right,
and we would be naive if we were to think otherwise.
Yes.
Our country has been transformed in a lot of ways in just a short period of time. It's not the country that I grew up in.
Sure.
It is enormously concerning if you go into an urban environment and people around you are so unlike you.
Right.
You feel ill at ease in public transport. You feel, whether you like it or not, you feel ill at ease.
Right.
The other concerning aspect is that we have people in politics, in the larger parties, and in the opinion-forming elements in this country, like NGOs and so on, seem to be concerned with certain agendas and not concerned about the Irish nation. I am concerned about the Irish nation. I understand in terms of NGOs, with 89 of them that are concerned about racism, and there isn't any group concerned about, say, Irish people who want to return from other countries insofar as they possibly can, and in terms of housing policy and so on, and the skills that they would bring back. So effectively, I have to tell you that I would be very much a hard hat,
right,
in terms of immigration policy. We'd have to go the way of the Danes, so I think we should go Danish. That is my approach in relation to all of that. I do have, I'm very conscious of things like housing policy. I think if we could remove the pressure, if we could remove the pressure on immigration, we'd have a chance to address our housing problems. But also, I think there would have to be, in terms of a number of people who have written on housing policy in this country, so I don't want to reinvent the wheel,
right,
but I believe that we have to use it, we'll have to build on public land. For instance, properties have to be affordable in terms of rental arrangements and so on. I could speak about that at length, but I won't speak about that too much at the moment. There are a lot of issues that I'm conscious of, that I won't be speaking about at length now, but there are certain things I could speak about.
Well, if I may add, just to go back on a little bit on what you said, that Ireland at some stage should need to possibly develop a plan B, and I think the plan B is towards being self-sufficient.
Absolutely.
Should that be something that should be factored in, especially if you consider food security and energy security?
Well, I think absolutely, I agree, Kevin. We've gotten an issue in terms of the quality of food that's available in supermarkets. Perhaps it isn't nutritious. I think a lot of people are educated about these things today, and I would believe that in terms of food security and the quality of food available, we need to cultivate and look after the interests of farmers in this country. There's a lot of things we can do on that side. I do have a strong views also about concerning if the powers that should not be internationally here impacting on this country are not prepared to look after Irish people to the extent that I would think it's important to do so. Not prepared to do that. I think we have to organize ourselves at ground level. That means a lot of cooperation, people in farming and so on, but also people in cities, even organizing, even setting up communities. As well as that, things like education. I believe that from the earliest years, I would remove children from the present system, from the small ones all the way up. I think that a lot of education is not education, miseducation. It's toxic, and indoctrination as well. I think that children, I hope they can recover from the indoctrination that are subject to. It's very much slanted towards the left. It's social Marxism, very, very harmful thinking, very dysfunctional thinking. It is designed to make people, as I would see it, to make them unwell. We have a lot of people in our world who are dysfunctional. A lot of people in Ireland today who are dysfunctional also. So
Yeah.
I think that in terms of, I could speak about this at length, but one of the things I'm concerned about would be to remove children from that environment and to homeschool. So these things
yes.
are hugely important. But in terms of the climate of opinion, one of the things that we don't have, and I think we need on a very large scale, we have to reclaim the intellectual leadership in this country.
Right.
And the French are quite good, the Germans are quite good, the Italians are quite good, the Spaniards are quite good. And looking at the French, just for a moment, I would connect very easily with the French right in over the last 200 years, starting with say Joseph de Maistre, and going all the way through to what's his name? He's a few people. The Benoist. Yeah, the Benoist. He would be. So effectively, what I'm saying is there has to be a respect for our particular traditions, our ethnicity, our tradition, and I'm saying that at this time, as I see it, there is no respect for that. And that is enormously concerning. Irish people are peaceable. Irish people are extremely kindly.
Yes.
They're generous-minded, and they can make mistakes because of our traumatic history. We think we can hit it off with everybody on the planet, and everybody is welcome here.
But we seem to have some sort of pushed colonial guilt put on us, which is
That's perfectly true, but there's a kind of altruism that's a pathological altruism, which I would regard as being exceptionally. Indeed, we tend to, we think, oh, these people will be great, they'll like us, and we'll all hit it off very well.
Yeah.
That is very
naive.
silly, chronically naive, and then the Christian element, very, very strong in most Irish people.
Yeah.
They say we have to be generous to these people, but it's out of proportion.
Correct.
And we are being misused by people, some people coming in, and also by the powers that be that should not be in this country. They are misusing this kind of thing, and they're cynical about it too. So there's a great deal of things that we have to consider. But I have, we're just beginning to unpack just say one or two or three things just now. But on a lot of things, I would have strong views.
Yeah. We'll even say repatriation of those people. Something I mentioned earlier on is the fact that we give over €1 billion in overseas aid. So surely to God, part of that package should be the returning of those that are deemed not eligible to stay in Ireland.
Well, I would absolutely accept that, but I would do it on a large scale, across the board, on a lot of fronts. And I did mention the Scandinavians and Danes a little while ago.
Yes.
These are the people that we have to consider. These are the people who can provide the examples that we can employ. And effectively, I think our country is broken. The systems are broken, and there's some positive aspects, because I know from my own encounters with people and working in circles having the same approach as we do in terms of our thinking. I think there are a lot of excellent people of high caliber, of good intellect, who can offer solutions, but we need to change our arrangements politically and socially in this country. And I do place an emphasis upon, there is a difficulty. If people don't have a lot in common, you're going to have political problems and social problems on a huge scale. If we have an economy that's dysfunctional in particular respects, or a social policy which isn't working, this is a recipe for disaster. So what I'm saying this afternoon is I'm saying that we're looking into the jaws of hell. I know that kind of language is fairly strong, and Irish people are a little bit laid back to an extent, although I think that's changing. I think that people are increasingly concerned. I'm saying to you that we need to be proactive. We have to make things happen. I believe we still have good people who have the capacity to change things in this country, and as I say, who are prepared to think the unthinkable. it may be the case that some people who are listening in would say that all that sounds a little bit naive, but it's not really naive, because a lot of things can change globally very, very quickly. It may happen in other countries in Europe before it happens here, but if sparks fly, the sparks will arrive in Ireland quickly. And we've seen in recent years that people are enormously angry. And increasingly you do have a sense that this country is largely dysfunctional. The quality of life in a lot of respects, not in terms of all the criteria we can apply, but in respect to a lot of criteria, this country is in decline. The quality of life is not good, and a lot of people they seem to be demoralized. So it's an awkward time. At the same time, it's a very interesting time. Everybody knows about the Chinese curse. You say something you don't like, you say, may you live in interesting times. I think our times right now are extraordinarily interesting.
But it's also, from a positive point of view, is, in my humble opinion, is to be around at a time when we are actually in a position to affect change. I want to go to meet my maker to know that I tried to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem.
Well, I absolutely agree.
That we, as people, Klaus Schwab may talk about the Great Reset. I'm talking about the Great Resist.
Well,
and I want to be part of the resistance movement.
Well, if you're a moral human being, you have no choice but to resist. I think the reality is that the people we oppose are bankrupt morally. That's the way I view it. But this afternoon, because I can talk about a huge amount of things just in the space of an hour or half an hour, whatever it happens to be, but I do have concerns which are beyond what we've been speaking about. I could just very briefly refer to them. The treatment of people in nursing homes in recent years, the administration of drugs and so on, tragic stories, perhaps criminality involved there as well. That's something that I would be concerned about. How people were treated in the context of Strokestown. You know a lot about that. A lot of people who are clued in to those type of questions will be concerned about that as well. I did speak about the European Union and say that I indicated that I wasn't a great fan, but even in terms of things as they are, and I'm prepared to consider everything, all the options are on the table, so I don't have a closed mind. I'm open to thinking. But in terms of our whatever regulations that are in place in the European Union, these things are not always applied. The administration of this country, they do not apply things in the way they could to assist the Irish people. Now, in terms of talking about that, it would take a little while. Concerned about the treatment of the farmers, the green agenda working against them in terms of the official green policy. Very, very harmful indeed. And absolutely. So it just goes on and on. I don't know if there are things I didn't speak about. I do think that it's extraordinarily important that we provide intellectual leadership, moral leadership, political leadership, and that needs to be done in a structured way. People who are courageous, who are honest, who are honourable, and saying, no, I don't want any of this. We live in a social context that's quite dysfunctional, and with the ideology, which is social Marxism. And also it's sort of a corporate communism, because we could talk about how that comes to be at length, but another time. I got it, Kevin. But the general point is that these things are impacting people at ground level.
But if I may just to throw in, right, we have to talk about COVID as well. And
for sure.
Lockdown, right?
I'm prepared to talk about COVID. I'm not afraid of that. In terms of statistics, with regard to, like everybody else who's aware of what's happening on this planet, is aware of the fact that, well, in terms of COVID lockdowns, that's one particular interest of mine.
Analysis of lockdown.
Yes,
Was
indeed.
there anything done?
I'm quite certain there wasn't, and in fact she didn't have, in terms of whatever legislation we had in place, quite a bit in terms of directives, in terms of regulations. The reality had been that the these particular, there wasn't a review in the houses of the Oireachtas
Yes.
that was worth talking about.
Yes.
And normally you have a sunset clause that things are reviewed after a certain amount.
Emergency
There was
legislation
emergency
not being
legislation
revealed.
that hadn't been revealed,
Correct.
and it wasn't considered carefully,
Correct.
and there was a lack of proportionality. There was also a concern among a lot of people in terms of their encounters with the guards, that they were stopped, and the amount of discretion available to the guards was very considerable,
Yeah.
and it worked against them. They had fines, and they had to appear in court and so on if they opposed these things. So there's a very much an authoritarian streak, which is enormously concerning. That's just on the COVID question.
Yes.
In terms of how things were organised at ground level.
Yeah.
I do have also concerns about the professions, the fact that very few people, I know some people who spoke up in medicine and so on,
Yeah.
but they were few and far between. I understand that people have a contract to maintain, and if the contract was
look what
powers that be
happened
had yanked their contract,
Yeah.
that would be enormously concerning. So yeah, I mean,
But look what
generally,
happened, Dr. Jerry Waters.
indeed,
You know, who we
yeah. So
interviewed
these
the
are
last time.
these are enormously
The whole practice shut
concerning. I also I would be concerned also to get statistics, official ones,
Yes.
about the incidence of mortality and of severe illness happening in this country at this time, because
Right.
it seems to me
Excess
that
deaths.
the excess deaths in terms of people presenting with stage 4 cancers and
Sure.
so on, these things are enormously concerning. So effectively, I think there's something rotten in the state of Ireland,
Yes.
or maybe a number of things that are rotten, and I
it
think
seems to
that
be
Irish people deserve much better.
Yeah,
And
representation.
I think that we cannot allow our country just to be so, or our populace to be so eroded
Yeah.
without the consent of the Irish people.
Yeah.
And I'm in favour of that. I mean, if they want to have a referendum, they must have a referendum,
Yeah.
and just see what they think. You know, so I'm not imposing anything like some other people. I don't wish to impose anything. I'm saying that it should be the opinions of the Irish people have to be taken into account in a context in which if we need to move outside of Europe, it'd be a large step. Is something that we have to consider.
Yeah.
And also in terms of international agreements. I mean, we're enormously generous in terms of overseas aid and so on.
Yeah.
We do a lot on that side, and it should be contingent on if people are coming into this country, that has to be considered. You know, you get aid if you don't send too many people,
Right.
or whatever number, perhaps there mightn't be a lot coming at all,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. Or if people are behaving quite badly, they
Yeah.
have a criminal history, we need to know who's coming in, and
Yeah.
we need to regain control of our
And
administrative
find,
process.
if I may,
Administrative process.
the airlines that are actually allowing people to come out the far side through Dublin Airport without documentation should be heavily fined.
I
Maybe
absolutely
20,000
agree.
euro
So I mean, there's
per passenger.
a lot
I
of
think that-
things, details that we have to work on.
Yeah.
I'm absolutely proactive. It's really a state of mind. I think that it isn't that we lack intellect, we seem to lack character
Right.
and courage. I mean, everybody recalls the quotation from Plato. Plato
Yeah.
said that courage is a kind of salvation.
Right.
And okay, well, I'm really talking about moral courage here. I think that's what we need.
Yeah.
And
You could also mention Socrates about a nation can withstand its wars and it can withstand its fools, but it cannot take treason from within.
I know that quotation so well. That's super.
Yeah.
It's a super quotation,
Yeah.
and Socrates is the one to keep in mind.
Yeah.
So I do think at this time we do have some small parties. We have independents
Right.
and people who care about this country, and some of them are very capable people indeed. And they're enormously red-pilled and clued in
Right.
to what's happening on the planet
Yeah.
and what the agenda is.
Yeah.
Now, I'm saying to everybody who's listening that I am conscious of all of that. I understand that politics is all about local issues,
Right.
so I'm prepared to address those issues in Kimage, Rathmines, Rathgar, Terranure, Harlescross, etc.
Yeah.
And parts of Drimna too, Crumlin. Crumlin being hugely important.
Yeah.
I'm prepared to do what I can on that side, help people in Roscommon as well, because I'm running in Roscommon. Everything available to me. can write. I am a scholar, basically.
Right.
So I would be very much concerned to put an institute in place, quite like the Institut Iliad in France,
Right.
where they have great lectures and very, very substantive people speaking and writing about the issues of the day, of the first rank. The writing is of the first rank, the analysis of the first rank, and so on. This is the kind of thing that I would be concerned to promote in Ireland, so that we take, effectively, as things stand, I would say we have the 1% on our side, people who care about this country and effectively constitute the tip of the spear.
Right.
And I think that the people who are opposed to us really are the 1% also,
Right.
who are globalists and perhaps do not care particularly about Irish people. In fact, I would think that they have contempt for Irish people, as they have contempt for people in our part of Europe. So we can learn something from the Danes and the Scandinavians.
But isn't it funny how Ireland's future, as you say, Scandinavian-wise, what can go wrong? You look at Sweden. And what can go right? You look at Denmark.
I think so. Yeah, in Sweden they're changing as well. We can learn a lot from places like Hungary.
Okay.
Now, Hungary has achieved a great deal, and I think it begins with self-respect and character.
Right.
So, broadly speaking, I appreciate what's happening there. Some people are critical of Mr. Orbán. They don't think he's quite as genuine as he seems to be, that he's not looking after the people in the way people are. But
he Soros.
Indeed,
guy,
precisely. I did hear that. I did hear that. So that's the kind of thing. So people ask questions about him.
Yeah.
But I do know that at ground level in Hungary, it seems to be a positive place to live in.
But he's also done as well, Ed, if I may, that he's actually given tax breaks to the local people to have more children, and he expects to get birth rates up to replacement levels by 2030.
Well, that's the kind of thing I absolutely am happy you mentioned that, because I believe that we need a program of natality and an opposition, a counter to social Marxism about the way things are. Effectively, we have been infiltrated. We are being destroyed within. And I'm saying to you that there are lots of people who are spotting this trend, and it's not acceptable to them, and they're prepared to fight against it. They know exactly what the agenda is, and the good news is that we can win on every argument.
Right.
If you begin to conceptualize, think about things in any coherent way, you will find that we have the right ideas, the right approach, and the approach that's in accordance with nature, and is respectful of our traditions as well. The people who we oppose and who oppose us quite vehemently are people who do not think things through, who are dysfunctional and are hypocritical and cynical. That's the way I would see it.
And not fulfilling their obligations.
They don't have any sense of obligations. They are hugely amoral.
They talk about international obligations, but never domestic obligations. And domestic, to me, should come first.
Well, I happen to agree. I think that, generally speaking, there is a hatred and contempt for Irish people, which is enormously concerning. If you told me 25 years ago that I would be living, maybe I was naive, but maybe I should have known this stuff, that I would be having to experience the context in which I find myself today in, I'd have said, no, that's silly. That isn't a possibility. Now, perhaps I was naive, because I think all this started in terms of practical application in the late 40s. It started in Britain, but also in Germany and France and so on in the 60s, particularly.
Well, I think at the time
it isn't accidental. Well, what we're experiencing in this country isn't accidental, so I think we have to have respect for ourselves, see what's going on, and we also need a leadership, intellectual leadership.
Right.
And we are here, independent people in smaller parties and so on, are here to provide that leadership. People on the sides of things and so on, who are people of character, I would say. The people I've met in the last number of years are people of character, who have earnestness, a moral earnestness in them, and that is exactly what we need. We don't want hucksters or people who don't give potheads or worse. I mean, you just have to look at the stuff on social media.
As the Green senator said down in Mullingar, she described people who had concerns about the green and climate agenda. She regards them as crackpots. Imagine that for an own goal.
She would say that. She would say that.
Yes.
I think so. So these are the people that we are opposed to. People who are just incoherent, who are dysfunctional, who are, can I say it, are immoral. And if you look at social media and you hear the reports about what's going on in this country, you really begin to question the quality of who we have and what they're up to. Also, I mean, we do live in a dark world. We have to accept that some people have a sinister agenda, have had it for a long time, and in these anti-cultural movements as well, that are impacting on Ireland in a way that our grandparents would have been inconceivable to them. These things are impacting. It's all orchestrated. We haven't spoken about the nature. I think, quite frankly, we're engaged in a kind of warfare, but it isn't a culture war. But it isn't just the warfare that we've had in the 20th century. It's fourth generation and fifth generation warfare, and a lot of people who are very clued into that, and all kinds of technologies that the powers that should not be can employ in terms of mind. Can I say it? It's mind control.
Absolutely.
Effectively. So this kind of thing
if you
is
think
our
a TV
context.
program is called a TV program, could it be because they're actually being programmed? Could it be something to do with the frequency of transmission that's hypnotizing people?
Well, I refuse.
I don't have a TV, by the way.
I don't have a TV. I don't have a radio. Everything comes to me from open source. And I think I'm a lot more informed than most people. I'm keeping awareness of how things are at ground level. I take public transport quite frequently just to see what's happening. And I would be...
And I hate to interrupt you, We're about 3 or 4 minutes away from our return of where we
whatever we did okay. We did okay then. We had a few things to say. So that is the beginning of some points I want to make. I would be here to help everybody. I'm committed to freedom of thought. I had been a libertarian in the early stage of my life as a member, an adjunct scholar of an institute in the States, Ludwig von Mises Institute in Auburn, Alabama. It changed my thinking to a certain extent. I do care about the collective, and I'm here to bring about change as the tip of the spear on the 1%. So with that, I'll end off in just this minute.
Well, as I say, there's a quote I like. There's a journalist I like was a fellow called Edward R. Murrow, and he had a great quote, and that was, "A nation of sheep begets a government of wolves."
Most certainly, that's exactly what we have at the moment.
Yeah.
And if you play the sheep, if that's your role in life, you will meet the wolf.
Yeah.
There's an Italian proverb that I can't quote it to you in Italian just at the moment.
And you can quote it in Italian. Go ahead.
I have to go and check it. But it's actually the next time. But it's actually there in place. So that is the world that we're in. We're certainly up against it, and we do have enemies. Most certainly we do. So there's a time for realism, for courage, and cohesiveness as well, because it's not easy.
There's actually a quote from Mike Tyson that I like, and he said, "Not everybody you fight is your enemy, and not everybody who helps you is your friend."
That's so true.
Isn't that
very
something?
Wise?
He is
very, very wise indeed. So he got it right.
And
however, I think we've had to fight so much in our history. We've had to overcome so much, and I think a lot of us still have that capacity to fight in the right cause. And I cannot say what the future will bring to the continent of Europe.
Choose wisely.
And to choose wisely with regard to our options, because it could be the trends that we're experiencing at this time could have lethal consequences if they're not properly curbed.
Perfect.
So that's what I have to say to you just at the moment. So thank you very much for the interview.
Thanks very much for coming in the car and just passing Bugler's Pub there. I recommend the rotisserie chicken. If it had feathers, I would eat it. It's so delightful. I thought you were going to let me out this Thank you. So thanks very much again, Ed.
Thank you very much.
It's been an absolute pleasure, and I'm sure we'll speak over the next couple of days.
Yes.
All right.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Good luck, and God bless.
Good afternoon.